Sword arrives, Filth subsides, someone declared loudly. The dense barrier shuddered violently. After rushing upward and converging at the fissure in the sky, the two streams of blood suddenly exploded apart and shot out in all directions. It was as if it were raining blood. The female ghost shuddered, and she lightly shook her sleeves. Countless drops of blood returned to the sleeves of her wedding dress. A young man dressed in white robes descended from the sky. There was a layer of misty white aura around him, and it was as if he were surrounded by the mists of a large lake or the astral energy of a mountain peak. His hair was bound, yet it was neither decorated with a hairpin nor covered by a crown. His index finger and middle finger were held together to form a sword, and there was a majestic column of sword chi that was as thick as a muscular arm emanating from his body. This was a blinding column of sword chi, and it was like a white flood dragon as it rapidly soared around the surroundings. The drops of blood and the dark aura of filth instantly dissipated upon being struck by this radiant sword chi. The handsome young man who looked no older than 30 gracefully landed between the female ghosts and the group of children led by Chin Ping'an. With a whoosh, the flying sword on the ground flew to the man's side, with the tip of its blade directly pointing at the plaque that read, "Beautiful water, noble wind." The man retracted his two fingers, causing the powerful and seemingly tangible column of sword chi to momentarily falter. He glanced back, and he came to a sudden realization when he saw the little girl in red with the small bamboo bookcase. He suddenly remembered that the old item that had once accompanied him through thick and thin for many years already no longer belonged to him. A carefree smile appeared on his face, and with a wave of his hand, Li Baoping's green bamboo bookcase shuddered slightly. The small silver gourd hidden inside trembled gently, and a snow-white flying sword that was only 2 inches long flew out from the sword-nurturing gourd. The column of sword chi reluctantly flew inside the flying sword. Afterward, the flying sword quickly dashed toward the young man's glabella, disappearing in a flash. The sword Immortal massaged his glabella and said in amusement, "Why don't we treat this entire continent as our home in the future? You're not a young girl waiting for marriage in your room anymore, so there's no need for you to coop yourself up in that building all the time." There was a spring in the white donkey's steps as it clip-clopped up to the young man and affectionately nudged his shoulder with its head. The man smiled faintly as he reached over to stroke the white donkey's head. "Long time no see, old friend. I've truly missed you." Following the young man's forceful entry, the fissure in the sky had already slowly closed up. However, this had used up a large amount of spiritual energy from the mountains and rivers. In just a short moment, almost 50 years of accumulated energy was flushed away, transforming into nothing more than polluted air. Lady Chu regained her composure, and she sneered. "A sword by the waist, externalizing sword chi, and a bonded flying sword. Each is more powerful than the former. What an outstanding terrestrial sword, Immortal. You're probably not from the Great Li Empire, right?" The sword Immortal, who had suddenly appeared from out of nowhere, smiled faintly and replied, "I'm nothing more than rootless duckweed, someone with no roots and no ties. My name isn't worth mentioning." After saying this, the man didn't only turn his head around, but he instead turned his entire body around, boldly exposing his back to the female ghost. Having just exited seclusion, the terrestrial sword Immortal's voice was gentle as he explained, "I can be regarded as somewhat of a friend of Aoyang's. Only somewhat. The other part of our relationship is me being somewhat of a disciple of his. However, it's a shame that Aoyang isn't willing to acknowledge this. He said that my nature is too pedantic, and that I'm also too soft-handed when I deal with matters. Because of this, I'm never quick enough when I draw my blade. He can't bear to embarrass himself by acknowledging me as his disciple. In any case, I rushed over from far away because I sensed the presence of my old friend and also the anomaly inside the sword-nurturing gourd. Forgive me for asking, but where is Aoyang? And who are you children?" "We're also Aoyang's friends," Chen Ping'an explained. "The gourd was given to Li Baoping by Aoyang, and Li Huai was responsible for looking after the donkey. As for where Aoyang went, I'm sure you'll hear about it in the future." Compared to the female ghost, Li Huai, who always had strange thoughts running around in his mind, felt much more familiar with this terrestrial sword Immortal who claimed to be Aoyang's friend. In his view, wouldn't Aoyang's friend be his friend as well? In terms of whether he was an immortal or not, could this be more important than the fact that they were friends? However, the incident on the ship had traumatized Li Huai, and he no longer dared to speak so carelessly. Nonetheless, he continued to gesture to the white donkey with his eyes. The young swordsman attentively listened to Chimpingan's explanation, and in the end, he nodded and said, I largely understand the situation now. Almost everyone noticed a sudden but slight tremor coming from the earth. It was as if an AO were turning its body, and it was as if the mountain range were about to collapse. The female ghost's expression changed drastically. She wanted to leave, yet she discovered that a bonded flying sword had already sealed off her path of retreat. A snow-white flying sword had already arrived 1 meter before her forehead at some unknown time. She was filled with rage, and she roared, Palace Minister Han, great river god of the embroidered flower river, are you two not going to do anything about this? If that Een god truly severs the mountain route here, not only will the embroidered flower river and the 2 other great rivers be affected, but which of Go Table Mountain, Iron Talisman River, and Dragon Whisker River in the north will be spared? Which of them won't be affected? Holding a large red lantern in his hand, there stood an old man in the sky beyond the barrier. He chuckled coldly and replied, Lady Chu, where has your imposing and confident manner disappeared to? The female ghost's expression became grim. Standing beside the old man was a god suited in armor, and with an azure snake coiled around his arm. He was here to lighten the mood, lest conflict break out between Palace Minister Han and the female ghost and affect the fortune of the Great Li Empire. His voice was solemn as he said, Lady Chu, Palace Minister Han and I can ask the Een god to stop his actions of severing the mountain route. However, we hope that Lady Chu can remain calm and refrain from any provocative speech as well. The female ghost smiled and replied, What if I want to spar with this great sword Immortal? Is this also a provocative request? Palace Minister Han chuckled in anger and spat. Oh, how benevolent of you, Lady Chu! I've truly learned a valuable lesson today. Very well. Very well! The Ministry of Rights of the Great Li Empire will definitely thank you in the future. You're nothing but a measly palace minister, yet you still dare to utter such wanton and threatening words? Are you trying to scare a little child? The female ghost sneered. You'll only have the right to order me around when you become the minister in charge of the Ministry of Rights. The azure snake on the great river god's arm hissed rapidly, sending plumes of white mist into the air. The great river god was clearly more familiar with the imperial court and future direction of the Great Li Empire than the secluded female ghost, and there was displeasure on his face as he warned. Lady Chu! The female ghost held a hand to her mouth as she giggled. At the same time, she turned slightly and held her dress with her other hand, performing a curtsy and saying, Then my apologies to Lord Han. The old man's face was red with anger, yet he chose to remain silent for the sake of the stability of the mountains and rivers in the Great Li Empire. Otherwise, with Lady Chu's habit of wantonly and brutally killing passing scholars, would the Great Li Empire have chosen to turn a blind eye for so many dozens of years? However, the old man had never felt that the imperial court's decision was incorrect. This was a majestic empire that was destined to last for thousands of years and tens of thousands of generations. What did a few dead scholars matter? What did their innocence or guilt matter? If he weren't an official of the Great Li Empire, and if he weren't the palace minister of the Ministry of Rights responsible for contacting and recruiting chi refiners, then his temperament and identity as a Confucianism disciple would have definitely pushed him to resolutely attack the female ghost. He would do so even if this meant an internecine outcome. However, during his ascension to his current position, he had witnessed brutal battles resulting in tens of thousands of deaths. He had witnessed the changing titles of the myriad official residences in the capital. He had witnessed assassins and spies from other nations lunging over like moth to flames. And he had witnessed battles between immortals that had ruthlessly inflicted death upon hundreds upon thousands innocent mortals. His position as palace minister dictated that he had to consider problems from a different perspective. Palace Minister Han was no longer the youth of years gone by who needed to studiously read Confucian classics. He was no longer an impoverished scholar who knew only the knowledge written on paper. In fact, for the sake of upholding the law of the Great Li Empire, he had once personally executed a brave and righteous martial artist who had been seeking revenge against immortals on behalf of innocent mortals. Before succumbing to his grave wounds, the martial artist had unleashed a torrent of abuse and sneered that the Great Li Empire was truly as comical as could be. He had scolded Palace Minister Han and labeled him a lackey of the immortals. However, Palace Minister Han had calmly told the martial artist that there would eventually come a day, perhaps in 30 years, or perhaps in 50 years, when the Great Li Empire would no longer suffer from innocent deaths like this. Before drawing his final breath, the righteous martial artist had spat a mixture of spit and blood onto his face. What matters in the world were truly clear-cut and black and white. Holding the lantern in his hand, and with complicated emotions in mind, the old man looked up and gazed toward the north. For some reason, his superior didn't seem to be in a hurry to show himself or interfere. The young sword immortal paid no heed to Lady Chu and the palace minister of the Great Li Empire. As for the great river god and Yin god, he cared even less about them. He simply turned around to face the female ghost who had been stopped by his sword, smiling and asking in amusement, "You want to engage in sword play with me?" Lady Chu smiled with squinted eyes and replied, "If we're only sparring, then I'm more than willing to. After all, this is my first time seeing a terrestrial sword immortal as young as you." The young sword immortal waved his hand, and the white donkey hurriedly ran back to Li Huai. He then reached toward the hilt of his sword before nodding and saying, "Sure thing." The female ghost squinted her eyes and replied, "Oh, you're not joking?" Grabbing the hilt of his sword, the young sword immortal said in a soft voice, "High radiance." He slashed down in a simple motion. However, heaven and earth changed colors, and the small and misty world was instantly illuminated with a brilliant radiance. A burst of sword chi surged toward Lady Chu. The shocked and flustered female ghost had no time to do anything but raise her hands and block her face. Meanwhile, her large sleeves blocked her entire body. Even so, she was still ruthlessly cut into two. The anguished wails of Lady Chu reverberated around the magnificent residence that stood behind her. The servants and maids froze and fell into a trance, with blood starting to trickle from the orifices on their faces. Some of them directly collapsed to the floor and dissolved into puddles of pus. Inside the residence, there was a young lady oblivious to the fact that she was stabbing her arm again and again as she learned embroidery. There were also two guards exchanging punches and eventually obliterating each other's heads as they practiced martial arts. However, their movements continued even though only less than half of their heads remained. The female ghost hurriedly dashed toward the gate of the residence. As she did so, countless sanguine threads materialized between the two halves of her body like the fibers of lotus roots. She rapidly knitted back together as she soared through the sky. Again, the young sword immortal said calmly. His sword swept sideways. Like the sparkling surface of water, an arc of sword light stretched across the sky. Lady Chu was severed at the waist, making her appear much like a beauty stepping out of the water. Her wedding dress softly landed on the top step in front of the residence. The female ghost transformed into wisps of chaotic smoke as she flew into the golden plaque, causing blood to continuously pitter-patter onto the floor below. At the same time, her pained and twisted face occasionally pushed against the surface of the plaque, during which she would beg, "Please spare me, sword immortal!" The young immortal had only attacked twice, unleashing one downward slash and one sideward slash. Yet this was already enough to slice the arrogant and imposing female ghost's soul into four, forcing her to return inside the plaque that maintained this small world. Indeed, this plaque was the root of the mountains and source of the rivers, and it was only inside here that the female ghost could keep herself alive. There was a common saying in the world, living under the eaves of others. In fact, this saying already revealed some secrets. Regardless of whether it was crossbeams or plaques that rested under the eaves, it was often the case that they were filled with secrets and mystery. Lin Shuyi's mind wavered. No wonder Aoyang had remarked that sword immortals were the most carefree, deadly, and unreasonable among chi refiners. However, it was a shame that the sword was unsuitable for Lin Shuyi even though he was extremely talented in cultivation. He couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. However, he quickly resolved his Dao heart again. If he could rely on his supreme Dao powers to achieve victory over divinely powerful terrestrial sword immortals in the future, then wouldn't that be even better? However, Lin Shuyi was extremely aware that the terrestrial sword immortal standing in front of them was most likely a chi refiner at the legendary upper 5 tiers. If pure martial artists were regarded as inferior to chi refiners, then sword immortals could be regarded as superior to all other kinds of chi refiners. The reason for this was simple: no one was willing to fight against powerful sword immortals. It was rumored that someone had once performed some analysis before. Among those who had severed the bridge to immortality of others, 1/3 of them were sword immortals. This was even more than the military and cultivators who were decisive in battle and were reluctant to attract karmic fate. One had to realize that there existed tens of thousands of paths of cultivation, each with its own fated opportunities. There were the 100 schools of thought, the formal sects, and the heretical sects, and so on and so forth. Sword immortals belonged to but one of the myriad paths. Chen Pingin's thoughts were much simpler than Lin Shui's. He was only contemplating a single thing. As it turned out, swords could also be used like this. The young sword immortal held one hand behind his back and gripped his sword with the other. The same mistake shouldn't be made more than 3 times. Lady Chu, why don't you accept one more sword strike? He asked with a smile. A figure silently appeared under the plaque. This was also an ordinary-looking young man with a sword resting behind his waist. Wei Jin of Wind Snow Temple, this is enough, he said slowly. It should be Wei Jin from the Divine Platform. The sword immortal in white corrected with a smile. He said no more, and the terrestrial sword immortal who claimed that he was yet to stabilize his cultivation base immediately unleashed another slash. The young swordsman opposite him was expressionless as he gripped the hilt of his sword and slowly drew it 1 inch from its scabbard. He didn't draw his sword any further. However, a miniature and adorable mountain range surprisingly appeared between the two swordsmen. This was a winding mountain range that hovered in midair. The young sword immortal, Wei Jin, severed the mountain range with his slash. However, the sword intent of his slash was almost completely exhausted as a result. Wei Jin didn't persist, and he didn't unleash any further sword strikes. Some thousands of kilometers away, a gigantic fissure appeared in an undulating mountain range that stretched 50 kilometers, creating a huge canyon. It was as if the mountain range had been struck by an immortal's blade. Wei Jin smiled and asked, "Are you that person from the Mahis sect?" The young swordsman standing under the plaque had a displeased expression. "Senior Aoyang, couldn't you have at least told them my name?" "Give me a moment," he said to Wei Jin. The young swordsman turned to face the female ghost whose soul was residing in the plaque, and he said with a frown, "Lady Chu, things have already come to this, so can you please show some sincerity?" The female ghost nodded, after which the barrier and the sky slowly dissipated. This was a sign that the barrier around her territory was being lowered, akin to how mortals open their doors to welcome guests. No matter how secluded and ignorant she was, she had still heard about this man's many achievements. He was a wanderer from the Mahis sect, and after taking refuge in the Great Li Empire with another leading figure of Moism, he had immediately been treated as an esteemed guest by the emperor. Right now, he was an honored guardian of the Great Li Empire's capital city and one of the most important figures overlooking the immortal forces. It was said that he would travel alone to all corners of the world whenever he had time. Every time he came across mountains or other spectacular scenery, he would transform these sights into his own sword intent. Thus, when the palace minister of the Ministry of Rites and the great river god of the embroidered flower river appeared on the street and cupped their fists in respect, the young swordsman merely nodded back in acknowledgement. This was proof enough of his transcendent standing in the Great Li Empire. The Yin god also stood beside Chen Ping'an, with his murderous aura soaring into the sky. Just then, he had been determined to sever the mountain root of this place, even if it meant sacrificing his cultivation base. He had been intent on fighting to the death with the female ghost. Once the mountain root was shattered, the shield of the female ghost would also be destroyed. At that time, she would lose her ability to rival those 10th-tier cultivators. A smooth and jade-like arm reached out from within the plaque, and the red wedding dress swayed as it floated toward this hand. When the female ghost stepped out from the plaque again, she had already dressed herself back in the red wedding dress. Even though she had been cut into 4 by Wei Jin just then, leaving her teetering on the brink of death, she had still insisted on maintaining the completeness of her wedding dress. It was abundantly clear just how precious this wedding dress was to her. She was completely obsessed with it. After stepping out from the plaque, the female ghost inadvertently glanced at the small bookcases on the children's back. Her expression instantly changed, and an aura of hostility immediately erupted from her body. Even though she tried her best to suppress it, this was still easily noticed by everyone else. The young swordsman sighed and turned to glance at the young boy wearing straw sandals whom he had seen once on the ship traveling along the embroidered flower river. There was sincerity in his voice as he asked, "Can you children put the 3 bookcases away first?" It was because of Lady Chu's resentment toward scholars that she gave up the opportunity to become a mountain goddess or river goddess at that time. The reason behind this is truly difficult to explain in just a few words. Chen Ping'an, since no significant damage was done, I hope that you and your companions can show some mercy and rest this matter. What do you say? The young swordsman pondered for a moment before smiling and adding, "If that's okay, then you only need to agree to let me use an illusion technique." "Go ahead," Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. The 3 small, emerald-green bookcases immediately disappeared from everyone's view. Of course, chi refiners would naturally be able to see them if they focused their gaze. The young swordsman returned his gaze to Wei Jin, the youngest cultivator at the upper 5 tiers in Eastern Treasured Vial continent. Not only that, but Wei Jin was also a swordsman whose strength could be elevated by another level. He was yet to reach 40, yet he had already reached the upper 5 tiers. He was a supreme prodigy whose talents would astonish everyone, regardless of which continent he was in. This would be the case even if he were in the vast and magnificent Middle-earth Divine Continent. Among the young cultivators, Wei Jin from Wind Snow Temple and Song Changjing from the Great Li Empire could be considered as the undisputed jade walls of the south and the north. One had broken through the 10th tier and become an 11th tier sword immortal, while the other had reached the legendary 10th tier of martial arts. Sure enough, they had both lived up to their expectations. One was a civil official, while one was a military officer. However, both of them possessed limitless potential for the future. The young Sword Immortal smiled and asked, "Apart from resolving the current issue, I wonder if Sword Immortal Wei has any other plans after traveling all the way to the Great Li Empire?" Wei Jin, who had traveled the world as a chivalrous swordsman the entire time, smiled and countered, "What does it matter if I don't have any other plans? And what does it matter if I do? If you simply plan to sightsee, then you're welcome to visit anywhere apart from the few restricted areas of the Empire." The young swordsman replied frankly, "If you don't mind, I'm willing to act as your guide. However, if you have ulterior motives and wish to take advantage of the unrest in the Great Li Empire, then I'll stand here in your way and personally witness just how quick Sword Immortal Wei's flying sword is." Wei Jin returned his renowned sword, High Radiance, to its scabbard by his waist. "In Wind Snow Temple, I've always been the one who has respected Master Wan the most. However, various reasons and circumstances have meant that I've been able to meet him. Thus, I accepted the task of accompanying these children to Yefu Pass on the border of the Great Li Empire after receiving the message that Master Wan sent from Jewel Small World. However, a senior called Aoyang provided me with some guidance regarding swordsmanship while I was traveling here, and it was because of this that I entered seclusion and advanced to the next tier. In other words, you don't need to worry about my trip to the north." The young swordsman opposite him was treating him with sincerity, and Wei Jin had always been an open-minded person to begin with. Thus, Wei Jin didn't treat the young swordsman's slightly stiff attitude as an act of provocation. Instead, he said with honesty to the young swordsman who possessed the impressive ability to move mountains, "If you want to spar with me, then I'm more than happy to accept your request. I initially thought that there was already no further need to travel around my home continent, the Eastern Treasured Vial continent. After listening to Aoyang's stories about the outside world, I felt a strong desire to visit Stalactite Mountain, the place where Aoyang trained. I want to genuinely hone my skills with the sword." It was precisely because Wei Jin had traveled to many places and encountered many people that he was increasingly aware of the importance of the word, perseverance. The blind old Taoist priest was unable to interject and say anything. He didn't dare to either. Just the widely renowned Wei Jin from Wind Snow Temple alone was able to stifle the old man who belonged to a heretical path. How rare were upper 5-tier cultivators in Eastern Treasured Vial continent. One had to realize that 10th-tier cultivators were already powerful enough to become the pillars of nations and empires, with rulers and emperors treating them as esteemed guests who could help safeguard the fortunes of their lands. Which upper 5-tier cultivator wasn't as elusive as a divine dragon? These were supremely powerful cultivators who were capable of founding their own sects. Many empires and nations existed in Eastern Treasured Vial continent, yet how many immortal clans and forces were able to enjoy the title of sect? So few that they could be counted on fingers. Wei Jin cupped his fists and said to the young swordsman, "Till we meet again in the future." The young swordsman cupped his fists in reply, saying, "Hopefully news of your feats will travel from Stalactite Mountain to Eastern Treasured Vial continent in the future." The two swordsmen exchanged a smile. Friends till old age, yet still like strangers, friends from a chance encounter, yet already like bosom friends. Such was the meaning of these words. "Let's go," Chen Ping'an said softly. Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shui all nodded in reply. The blind old Taoist priest gritted his teeth and summoned his courage before asking in a careful voice, "Esteemed Immortal, the two disciples of this weak Taoist have been invited into the residence by Lady Chu, so can you please allow me to collect them before I leave?" This weak Taoist is simply worried that his crude and naughty disciples will accidentally break Lady Chu's household rules. The young swordsman turned to the female ghost and asked in a gentle voice, "Can you let them go, Lady Chu? Since you've already spoken, how could I possibly dare to refuse?" The female ghost replied with a nod. This guardian swordsman of the capital had been able to block Wei Jin's third strike by simply pushing his sword 1 inch out of its scabbard. He was far more powerful than he let on, and the female ghost in the wedding dress was keenly aware of just how fearsome he was. To put it simply, he wasn't someone that she could rival. This would most likely be the case even if she were at her peak and had the protection of the surrounding mountains and rivers. In any case, she couldn't be regarded as a genuine 10th-tier cultivator. While it was unknown whether this strange swordsman from the Mahas sect was similar to Wei Jin, in the sense that he was already an 11th-tier terrestrial sword immortal, she was slightly aggravated as she peered at the young children. If it weren't for one of them preventing her from lighting the lanterns, and if she hadn't seen their detestable appearance as traveling scholars, how could she have possibly suffered such a miserable fate? To say nothing of the fact that she had been slashed apart twice by the attacks of Wei Jin, even the root of the mountains and source of the rivers in her territory had almost been destroyed by that Yin god. Holding the leash of his white donkey, Wei Jin turned to Chen Ping'an and the others before smiling and asking, "Shall we head off now?" Chen Ping'an naturally had no issues, and thus, a new terrestrial sword immortal joined their group on this long journey to the north. Li Baoping walked up beside Chen Ping'an and said, "Junior uncle, what's wrong?" Chen Ping'an asked softly. Li Baoping giggled and replied, "Nothing." Chen Ping'an patted her head. The little girl in the red jacket walked next to Chen Ping'an. In reality, she was thinking of her eldest brother. With a wave of her hand, the female ghost casually plucked the lame young boy and the round-faced little girl from her garden and tossed them in front of the blind old Taoist priest. Afterward, she glanced out the corners of her eyes in some direction. Coincidentally, she saw the young boy in straw sandals also turning his head to glance back at her. The two of them locked eyes. Chen Ping'an's gaze was cold. For some unknown reason, Lady Chu suddenly felt a slight sense of apprehension at this moment. However, she quickly dismissed this as preposterous and comical. She quickly retracted her gaze, not willing to waste any more time on this ordinary young boy. She was confused as to why she was suddenly feeling slightly paranoid. Afterward, she subconsciously glanced back again, yet the young boy in straw sandals had already turned around and slowly walked away. He naturally fell in line at the back of the group. In their fight over the 30-odd dragon kills in the small town, the 4 families and 10 clans in Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley had schemed endlessly and shed much blood over hundreds upon thousands of years. Now that the small town had become Dragon Spring County and opened up to outsiders, however, they had no option but to form an alliance and combine their powers. However, which of them wasn't privately contacting the Imperial Court and the immortal forces of the Great Li Empire? Some rumors spread like wildfire in the outside world, yet the families and clans in Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley didn't take them seriously at all. For example, people claimed that the Dragon, Qilin, and Phoenix of the Li clan had become nothing more than jokes following the death of Li Baoping's teacher, the master of Mountain Cliff Academy. Instead, they claimed it was Zhao Yao and the other young scholars that the powerful families and clans in the small town didn't dare to underestimate. These were youths who had the potential to become immortals. However, it was said that the second son of the Li clan's clan leader, Li Baozhen, had encountered a powerful person in the capital. This person had made an exception and accepted him into the Imperial Academy as a disciple. Here, he studied grand etiquette with Lu Wenhu, a renowned scholar in the Imperial Court. This had sent some small waves through the small town. As for Li Hong's eldest son, the only impression that the seniors in Fortune Street had of him was that he was a bookworm who had become stupid from reading too much. Meanwhile, his daughter Li Baoping was a crazy girl who always ran around outside. She had done so ever since a very young age. Apart from this, there was nothing special about Li Hong's eldest son and only daughter. Only his second son, Li Baozhen, had the chance to bring honor to the Li clan. In the study in the Li clan's residence, a young man with a distant expression handed a letter to his father, Li Hong. This was a letter from the capital city. Li Hong chuckled and remarked, "Baozhen is the same as his younger sister. He'd rather send letters to his older brother than send them to his own father and mother." The young man smiled bitterly and replied in a soft voice, "Father, you should mentally prepare yourself for what's written in the letter." Li Hong's expression instantly became solemn. He pulled the letter out of the envelope, and after skimming over the first few lines of greeting and small talk, his expression became increasingly dark the further down that he read. He stood up and lit an oil lamp, placing it inside the brush washer. He then held the letter over it, and the ashes fell into the exquisite plum blue brush washer. The man summarized his son's actions with 2 words. Absolute farce. What do you think about this matter? Li Hong asked his eldest son. Should we listen to your younger brother's suggestion and erase the lowly genealogical records of Zhu He and Zhu Lu's ancestors through the county office? Should we help them become commoners? If Zhu He and Zhu Lu manage to successfully change their status and erase their names from the lowly genealogical records of servants kept by the Li clan, then their children and grandchildren would no longer need to become generational servants, or maids either. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe this as a carp jumping a dragon's gate and completely changing their fortune. Those guarding the gate for the Prime Minister could also be regarded as 7th-rank officials. In terms of who could achieve success and who could only meander at the same level, this was wholly dependent on the abilities of those who cast off the shackles of servitude and obtained freedom. If one were obsequious and untalented, then it would naturally be better for them to rely on more powerful people. If one were knowledgeable and able, then it would naturally be better for them to forge their own path. The young man smiled bitterly and replied, "Father, you've already made up your mind." Li Hong leaned back in his chair and raised his hands to massage his temples. "But I still want to hear your opinion. It's unsustainable if everyone in the clan wants to obtain wealth and opportunity from dangers and risks." There was a bright glimmer in the young man's eyes as he quietly sat there, and he replied, "The most challenging part of this is that one party will feel estranged from the clan no matter who father chooses to support. Thus, Baozhen's actions were incorrect. His decision to act on his own and leave the clan with no path of retreat is even more incorrect. His actions are unpleasant, and his maliciousness toward Shinpingen from Clay Vase Alley is the most incorrect." Li Hong's expression was complicated as he looked at his eldest son. "As Baozhen's older brother, how could you not be aware of his temperament? Since you already knew that things would end up in such an awkward situation, why didn't you choose to accompany him to the capital at that time? Grandfather has entered seclusion, Baoping has left on a distant journey, and the small town is also undergoing major changes at this moment. Now is a critical time that will decide the future direction of the families and clans. The Li clan can't give itself a blind spot," the young man replied. "My mind wouldn't be at ease if I left. And even if I do plan to leave, that can only be after the situation here has settled down and become clear. If there's no other option, then I can also choose to not participate in the imperial examination for a while." Li Hong nodded slightly when he heard the mature and level-headed analysis in the beginning. However, he instantly became worried when he heard the last few sentences from his eldest son. He sat up straight and exclaimed loudly, "You definitely can't do that! Recruiting scholars through the imperial examination is one of the most important policies of the Great Li Empire. This is no inferior to the imperial court's recruitment of immortal forces. Li Baozhen is more impatient than you, and before leaving home, he promised your grandfather and me that he would abide by the rules and refrain from using hidden schemes after leaving the small town. He promised that he wouldn't push his luck or take any risks. And what was the result? He's decided to act first and ask later. No, we have no option but to accept his farcical decisions. Since this is the case, your decision to delay participating in the imperial examination will slow the progress of the Li clan down by at least 3 years." The young man silently swallowed the words that had already reached the tip of his tongue. If he uttered these words, it would signify the end of his already strained relationship with his younger brother. Their relationship would hit rock bottom, and there would be no possibility of mending it ever again. Moreover, uttering these words would also be absolutely meaningless. This was because his father had already made up his mind. In the depths of his heart, he didn't disagree with his second son taking risks to seek opportunity and wealth. To get up early and work hard for 3 years on an incorrect path, or to lie low and wait for 3 years on a correct path. The effect that each would have on the clan and its 2 generations for the next 30 years went without saying. The young man left the study and walked down the spacious corridor that was decorated with elegantly carved patterns by himself. He suddenly heard the tinkles of a wind chime hanging from the eaves. He placed his hand inside his sleeves, shut his eyes, and tilted his head slightly upward. As he listened to the ethereal chimes, he murmured, "Having too many smart people around is also a bad thing." The scholar in azure was called Li Shixing. Without the sinister interference from the female ghosts, Qin Ping'an and his companions' trek through the mountain range became far smoother than before. There was a path in the ravine that led all the way to the female ghost's residence. This path should have been wide enough to allow 2 horse-drawn carriages to travel side by side, yet it was now already filled with wild grass and covered in chilly mists. Even so, this was still far better than the path that they had arrived on after using the barrier-shattering talisman to leave the path to the underworld. That was a path where Qin Ping'an had needed to use auspicious talisman to slowly clear the vegetation to clear a path forward. The man who the female ghost had called a terrestrial sword immortal didn't speak after suddenly joining their group. Instead, the sword immortal from Wind Snow Temple's divine platform held the leash of his white donkey with one hand and held the hilt of his sword with his other hand as he walked with his eyes shut. Meanwhile, his mind wandered around in a distant place. If there existed a gulf between the lower 5 tiers and middle 5 tiers, then there undoubtedly existed the distance between heaven and earth between the 10th tier and the 11th tier. Even though 10th tier chi refiners were honored as esteemed pillars in mortal empires and nations, it was still necessary for them to cultivate in stillness and seclusion for dozens or even hundreds of years at a time. Only then could they somewhat enter the extreme stillness begets movement. This was a state that would allow them to advance to the 11th tier. However, among the chi refiners who left their clans and sects after entering this state, many would eventually fail to advance to the 11th tier. If this were the case, they would return to their clans and sects to continue cultivating in seclusion. Wei Jin silently stopped practicing the unique breathing technique of Wind Snow Temple. He opened his eyes and turned around to observe the children who were familiar with Aoyang. However, most of his attention was still focused on the memorial service in Wind Snow Temple. He was still unable to break free. It had already been many years since he had last visited his master's tomb and offered wine to him. After hearing the so-called bullshit little stories from Aoyang, Wei Jin was now yearning to visit Stalactite Mountain, the mountain that lay on the border between the 2 worlds. He was even more eager to visit that city wall, the great wall atop which countless sword immortals stood. Wei Jin heaved a sigh, feeling like he hadn't fought to his heart's content just then. If his physical body had already stabilized and flawlessly fused together with his sword intent while he was standing under the beautiful water noble wind, plaque just then his final sword strike at the sword immortal from the Maha sect wouldn't have contained any imperfections. In other words, the young swordsman from the Maha sect would have needed to draw his sword by more than an inch. In fact, he would have needed to draw it at least halfway. Li Huai was extremely curious as he looked at the drifting gaze of the immortal in white. At the same time, he also felt very disappointed. How great would it have been if Aoyang were present? Li Huai wanted to pat Aoyang's shoulder and tell him that this was the definition of a powerful swordsman, and that he was still a small way off. He wanted to tell Aoyang to learn from Wei Jin. After all, just look at how Wei Jin had arrived. His sword had arrived before his person, and sword chi had hovered around his white robes. Afterward, he had pummeled the evil ghost woman until she started crying for her mother. Just how astounding and impressive was this? Was this something that Aoyang, who liked to wear a bamboo hat and walk next to the river with the white donkey, could achieve? Lin Shuyi noticed that Wei Jin was observing them. However, he also noticed that the swordsman from Wind Snow Temple was lost in some other thought. The aloof young boy quietly adjusted his bookcase and started to contemplate his own cultivation. Lin Shuyi's mind was heavy after experiencing the female ghost's unfathomable mystical abilities and witnessing the godly exchange between the 2 powerful swordsmen. There was still a long and arduous path before him. His measly cultivation base right now was not even enough to warrant a casual attack from them. Wei Jin retracted his drifting gaze before stopping and retrieving a smooth jade tablet from his sleeve. He smiled and said honestly, "I can't accompany you children all the way to Yefu Pass. I need to immediately head to Jewel Small World and use the dragon-slaying platforms there to sharpen High Radiance and my bonded flying sword. I need to prepare for my journey to Stalactite Mountain in the future. Aoyang told me that the place lying beyond Stalactite Mountain is experiencing an intense 1 in 100-year battle right now. This is something that I definitely can't miss." When Wei Jin saw none of the children step forward to accept the jade tablet, he patiently explained, "Even though you children are being accompanied by a relatively powerful Yin god, I still want to give you this jade tablet to help prevent any unexpected incidents like the one today. This is a unique peace and safety tablet from Wind Snow Temple and True Martial Mountain. If you encounter any trouble, you can simply activate the jade tablet with your chi and explain your situation to it. Once you release it, it will automatically fly to the sect and ask for assistance. Seeing that the children still refused to step forward to accept the important jade tablet, Wei Jin didn't scold them for being foolish and naive. Instead, he smiled and said, "If you feel like it will be safer with me accompanying you rather than having this small jade tablet, then I naturally won't turn down your request. I'm simply discussing the options with you. In terms of what you choose, this is completely up to you. Senior Sword Immortal, you can head to Dragon Spring County to search for the dragon-slaying platforms to sharpen your blades. We'll accept the jade tablet," Chen Ping'an said. "Senior Yin God has always planned to accompany us to Yefu Pass. The Imperial Court of the Great Li Empire has also granted us permission to head there without any obstructions. This is why the 3 cultivators appeared in front of the female ghosts just then. Even though they were a little late, this still proves that they intend to keep their word." Chen Ping'an pondered for a moment before saying earnestly, "I'm sure that big incidents like the one today won't crop up again and again." He accepted the jade tablet and handed it to Lin Shui, saying quietly, "Remember to keep it safe. Also, it's best that you don't put it in the bookcase. Otherwise, it will be difficult to retrieve in emergency situations if you put it too far away." Lin Shui nodded and replied, "I understand. I'll place it in my sleeves next to the 2 remaining paper talismans." Wei Jin gave a knowing smile. He was slightly surprised by Chen Ping'an's reasonable nature. In fact, Wei Jin had been slightly puzzled about his position as leader just then. While standing on the street in front of the female ghost's residence, Wei Jin had already noticed that Lin Shui was someone who had set foot on the bridge to immortality. His acupoints were filled with vitality, and they were not only magnificent but also stable. He was a rare cultivation talent. Moreover, the young boy was also an aloof and proud person, so how could he be willing to listen to others? Yet, it seemed like he didn't have any problem with Chen Ping'an being their leader. As for the youngest and most mischievous child among them, there was naturally no need to comment on his good fortune, seeing that Aoyang had especially tasked him with looking after the white donkey. Because of this, Wei Jin would give him a parting gift no matter what. After traveling through so many nations unencumbered, Wei Jin had naturally come across all kinds of fated opportunities and obtained all manners of rare treasures. He had given most of them to fated individuals, so the only treasures he had right now were naturally the most precious ones. Moreover, after observing Li Huai through his limpid sword heart, sweeping away the foggy barrier that someone had purposely erected, Wei Jin discovered that Li Huai's innate aptitude was actually even better than Lin Shui's. He was a top-notch piece of jade that the Militarian elders dreamed of obtaining. Appearing wreathed in white mist in the sword Immortal Wei Jin's eyes, the little girl wearing the bright red jacket asked, "If this tablet encounters a situation like today, will it truly be able to fly away without being stopped? Will it be able to fly out of the path to the underworld and the night sky barrier that you shattered with your flying sword just then?" Wei Jin laughed heartily and explained, "Rest assured, even the sagely barriers of 10th-tier cultivators won't be able to trap it. This jade tablet is extremely quick, much quicker than traveling atop a flying sword. As the jade tablet makes its way to Wind Snow Temple, the disciples of the sect who are traveling the world will summon it before them using a secret technique once they detect its presence. These disciples will often be willing to offer their assistance. Thus, most dangers are resolved without requiring any reinforcements from the sect." Li Baoping nodded and said, "I understand. The jade tablet itself is a kind of passport and emblem. If even Senior God can't defeat them, then these people definitely have powerful backgrounds. With their experience and age, they'll immediately recognize Wind Snow Temple's peace and safety tablet. As such, they'll definitely feel apprehension towards Senior Sword Immortal and your sect. So even if the jade tablet is unable to reach Wind Snow Temple, just its presence alone is already a type of deterrence. Showing this jade tablet is equivalent to warning others not to provoke Wind Snow Temple." Wei Jin faltered upon hearing this, astonished at the intelligence and understanding of the little girl. He immediately developed a good impression of Li Baoping, who was wearing a serious expression. Thus, he naturally found her friendly and adorable as well. In the end, Wei Jin unconsciously glanced at the young boy in straw sandals again. Perhaps he only became the leader because he's the oldest? Wei Jin shifted his gaze and looked at Li Huai, the little boy who had helped him look after the white donkey the entire time. After pondering for a moment, he flicked his wrists and summoned a row of small clay statues to his palm. They were only half a finger tall, with one being a swordsman with a sword by his waist, one being a Taoist holding a fly whisk, one being an armored warrior, one being a crane riding woman, and one being a gong beating watchman. There were 5 clay statues in total. These 5 clay statues can be regarded as semi-inanimate objects that have combined the profound puppet knowledge of naturalists and Mahists and the vast talisman knowledge of Taoists. Wei Jin explained as he handed the clay statues to Li Huai. I don't understand the intricacies behind them, and I simply know that they might come to life one day if you look after them properly and familiarize them with your aura. Afterward, you'll need to continually feed them the essence of the 5 elements: fire, spirit, water essence, and so on. Due to their small size and miniature acupoints, meridians, and so on, they can only reach a maximum cultivation base equivalent to 7th-tier or 8th-tier Qi refiners. When he said this, Wei Jin realized that he had perhaps spoken too much. He stopped speaking, and he simply looked at Li Huai with a smile. The little boy didn't forget to turn his head to look at Chen Ping'an. The latter hurriedly nodded, and only then did Li Huai grab the 5 clay statues, thinking that he now had 6 small minions if he counted the painted puppet in his bookcase. Wei Jin jumped onto the white donkey and said, "Then farewell. I wish you all a safe and smooth sailing journey." Even though Wei Jin was generous and chivalrous, he couldn't be regarded as someone who would freely part with treasures and wealth. The path of cultivation was long, so who knew whether their brief and few encounters with others were positive fate or ill fate? With Wei Jin's powerful karmic fate, and with the intangible and undetectable will of the heavens, who knew what would happen if a person accepted Wei Jin's presence at an inappropriate time and without the necessary karmic fate? If they weren't fated to receive such good fortune, perhaps these presents would instead bring them calamity and lead them to an early death? Why were immortals so stringent when they recruited disciples? In fact, some tests would even last dozens of years. Since these children had traveled with Aoyang before, Wei Jin believed that they were definitely no ordinary children. As for who Aoyang cared about the most, regarded the most highly, and had the highest hopes for, it might have been Li Huai, the little boy with a powerful background who was blessed with fortune, or it could have been the extremely likable little girl wearing the red jacket. It could also have been Lin Shi, the young boy who stayed true to his Tao heart. Any one of these options was possible. Or perhaps Aoyang had simply spread the love between the 3 children. However, the most pressing matter for Wei Jin right now was to head to Stalactite Mountain. Otherwise, he would miss the opportunity to witness that grand and lofty battle. If this weren't the case, he would have truly wanted to personally accompany these children to Yefu Pass. As a swordsman who had ambitions of reaching the pinnacle of the sword Tao, how could he let slip this 1-in-100-year opportunity? Chen Ping'an instinctively cupped his fists in respect. However, he habitually placed his left hand over his right hand due to his first experience on the ship traveling down the embroidered flower river. Now, however, it seemed like Wei Jin and the other young swordsmen both cupped their fists with their right hand over their left hand. This left Chen Ping'an feeling a little awkward. Afraid that he was breaking some kind of rule, Chen Ping'an hurriedly changed the placement of his hands. Wei Jin noticed this small detail, and after seeing the young boy's embarrassed expression, he couldn't help but chuckle. Bending down to pat his old companion's back, he said, "Let's go." The white donkey happily trotted forward. However, it suddenly turned around after taking a few steps, and it ran back to Chen Ping'an and nudged the young boy's face. Only then did it set off on the long journey with its owner. Even though Li Huai had been responsible for looking after the donkey, how could the little boy have the patience and determination to actually do so? Had it not been Chen Ping'an quietly feeding it, cleaning its nose, and shooing mosquitoes and flies away? Chen Ping'an smiled and waved goodbye to the white donkey. The swordsman in white chuckled in surprise. He leaned back and bounced up and down with the cadence of his donkey. Okie dokie, as it turns out, this terrestrial sword immortal's relationship with others is even inferior to his old companions. Heaven and earth were barren, bleakness and desolation pervaded. It was as if only a single wall remained between the sky and the land. This was a wall that stretched for an unfathomable length, and that towered to an inconceivable height. Even when looking over from 50 kilometers to the south, one could still clearly see the 18 large characters that had seemingly been engraved using sword qi. Judging from this fact, one could imagine just how colossal the characters were, and just how tall the Great Wall was. Tao Power, Grand Majestic, Western Land. Thunder Pool Restricted Land, Eternal Lasting Sword Qi. Qi Dong Chun, Fierce. Several hundred kilometers south of the Great Wall, the sound of a horn suddenly blasted through the air as if it wanted to shatter the roof of heaven and earth. Countless dark shadows gathered together in a dense crowd. Following the sound of the horn, specks of fire started to appear, eventually transforming into a sheet of flickering light. If one looked over from an elevated position far in the north, what they would witness would be a sea of dazzling flames. Standing atop the city wall, an old voice rang out with dignity and might. "Swords, take flight!" Above that great wall that stretched for tens of thousands of kilometers and had rested here for a millennium. At this instant, hundreds of thousands of flying swords flew over the city wall in unison and dashed toward the south, carrying with them trails of brilliant sword chi. It was as if flood water were crashing over a levee. What could encapsulate the stunning scenes of the world better than this?